He only knew that the girl was going to drop it. The box was too wide for her arms, and she was tilting sideways, trying to keep it level. And the wet slush on the sidewalk outside the post office on Queen Street was exactly the kind of surface that did not forgive a misstep. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Was wearing a purple jacket that was a size too big, the sleeves pushed up to her wrists, and her boots had a stripe of road salt-dried white across the toes. The box said fragile in red letters on 2 sides, and she had the third side pressed against her chest so she couldn't read it, but the people passing by could, and none of them stopped. Edwin Marsh stopped. He hadn't planned to. He had a meeting at 2 o'clock, and it was already 20 past 1, and the parking on Queen was always worse than he remembered, and he'd been walking with his head down against the wind, the way Torontonians learn to walk in February. But something made him look up at exactly the right moment, or the wrong one, depending on how you measured it, and he saw the box beginning to tip. He reached it before it fell. "Easy," he said, not to her exactly, more to the box itself, steadying it from underneath with both hands while she scrambled to get her grip back. "I've got it. Take your time." She looked up at him with the particular wariness of a child who has been taught not to talk to strangers, and then something in his face, the white at his temples maybe, or just the fact that he was already holding the box and hadn't tried to take it from her, seemed to satisfy whatever calculation she was running. "Thank you," she said. "It's heavy." "It is," Edwin agreed. He didn't let go yet. "Where are you headed?" She pointed down the block. "My grand's car, she's just there." She couldn't find parking either, so she said, "Hey, wait here. But the post office lady said I had to go outside." Edwin looked where she was pointing. There was a silver sedan idling halfway up on the curb 50 feet away, hazard lights blinking. "I can carry it," the girl said quickly. "I was doing fine. You were doing very well," Edwin said honestly. "But it's slippery. Would you mind if I walked with you?" Just to the car. She considered this for a moment with great seriousness, the way children consider things when they sense the decision actually matters. "Okay," she said. "But Gran will want to know your name." "Edwin Marsh," he said. "And yours?" "Rosie," she said. "Rosie Beaumont Quan." They walked together to the car, Edwin carrying the box. Rosie, walking beside him with her arms free and her chin up in the cold air, looking, he thought, considerably more dignified than she had a minute ago. The window of the sedan rolled down before they reached it. A woman in her mid-60s leaned out, dark hair cut short, reading glasses pushed up on her head. "Rosie, who is Edwin Marsh," Rosie said in the tone of someone completing a necessary administrative task. "He helped with the box. It was slipping." The woman looked at Edwin with the same careful assessment her granddaughter had used, then nodded. "Frances Beaumont," she said. "Thank you. Pop it in the back. Rosie, get the door." Rosie got the door. Edwin slid the box onto the seat, and Frances said thank you again, and that was the end of it. He was back on the sidewalk in under 3 minutes, and he made his meeting with 4 minutes to spare, and he thought nothing more of it. The law office of Marsh, Calloway and Sutton occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Bay Street that Edwin had leased for 19 years. He had painted the walls himself when they first moved in, or rather he had painted one wall before his partner at the time told him firmly that this was not how things were done and hired someone to finish it. The one wall he'd done was slightly uneven near the baseboard. He'd never had it fixed. He was 61 years old. He had argued before the Ontario Court of Appeal 14 times and won 11 of them. He had 2 adult sons, both in Vancouver, both doing things he was proud of and didn't fully understand. He had a house in the annex that was too large for one person and a cottage near Parry Sound that was exactly the right size for one person, which told you something about how he spent his time. He had been alone since Carol left, which was going on 6 years now, and he would have said, if anyone had asked, though fewer people asked than you might expect, fine with it. He was genuinely, honestly fine. He had his work and his running, and his Thursday night dinners with his friend Barry, who talked too much about his knee replacement but was otherwise excellent company. He was fine. He told himself this on the drive home that evening, past the construction on Bloor and the students spilling out of the subway at Spadina. The city doing what it always did in February, which was endure. He told himself this while he made dinner, which was pasta with olive oil and whatever herbs were still alive on the windowsill, and while he ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone felt performative in a way he couldn't quite name. He thought about Rosie Beaumont Quan and her tilting box for approximately 30 seconds before the thought dissolved into the ordinary current of the evening. He did not think he would see her again. He saw her again 6 days later. Same post office. He'd come in to pick up a package that hadn't fit in the slot, a book he'd ordered and forgotten ordering, which happened with increasing frequency. And she was there with her grandmother at the counter, negotiating the return of something in a yellow padded envelope. She recognized him first. "That's Edwin Marsh," she said, loud enough that the postal clerk looked up. Frances Beaumont turned, and for a moment her face did the thing faces do when they're sorting through files. Mild blankness, then recognition, then a small genuine smile. "The box," she said. "The box," Edwin agreed. He waited his turn at the counter while Rosie watched him from her grandmother's side with an expression of open scientific interest. When he was done, he found them both waiting near the door. "We're getting hot chocolate," Rosie said in the same tone she might have said the sky is gray or it is Tuesday. "Gran says you can come if you want." Frances Beaumont gave him a look that was apologetic and also faintly amused. "She doesn't believe in working up to things." "No," Edwin said. "I can see that." He came for the hot chocolate, which was from the cafe 2 doors down that used real milk and served it in paper cups with a piece of dark chocolate balanced on the lid. He stayed for 40 minutes. Rosie drank hers in 8, and then spent the rest of the time drawing something on the back of a receipt, occasionally showing it to her grandmother for review, and once to Edwin, who she had apparently decided was trustworthy enough to look at the drawing, which was of a horse standing in front of a post office. "Does the horse have a package to pick up?" Edwin asked. Rosie looked at him, like he was being deliberately obtuse. "No, the horse works there." "Of course," Edwin said. "Of course it does." Frances laughed. It was a real laugh, and self-conscious, the kind that surprised you when you hadn't expected to be charmed. Edwin noticed it the way you notice a cracks of sunlight in February, not with analysis, just with the fact of it. He walked them to their car when they left. Frances said it wasn't necessary. Edwin said he was going that way anyway. He was not going that way, but it was a short detour and the air was cold in the clean way that February sometimes managed, and he found he wasn't ready for the afternoon to be over yet. At the car, Rosie shook his hand formally. "I'll probably see you at the post office again," she said. "We go a lot because Gran sells things on the internet, Rosie," Frances said mildly. "It's true," Rosie said, unperturbed. "It is true," Frances agreed, and looked at Edwin over Rosie's head with an expression he couldn't quite read, except that it was warmer than it needed to be, for a person he had met twice at a post office. He went back to Bay Street and sat at his desk for 3 hours. He was working on a complicated estate litigation that had been going on for 2 years and would likely go on for 2 more. He was good at his work. He had always been good at his work. He focused, and the afternoon passed, and he did not think about Frances Beaumont until he was on the subway platform at King, when the thought arrived uninvited that he did not know her phone number. He let the thought sit there. It sat there, all the way home. He did not return to the post office that week, or the week after. He used the pickup locker at the pharmacy near his office instead, which was more practical anyway, and told himself this with such consistency that he almost believed it was the reason. He saw her at the Annex Library on a Saturday in March. He had come for a book, which was a thing he could have done online, but chose not to, because the library was 4 blocks from his house, and he liked the particular quiet of it on weekend mornings, the kind of quiet that felt chosen rather than empty. He was in the large print section, not because he needed large print yet, but because the novels there were inexplicably good, when he heard Rosie's voice from the children's section on the other side of the shelf. "This one," she was saying, with the certainty of someone who had already made the decision before being consulted. "And this one. And this one. But only if we can renew it twice." He went around the shelf. Frances was crouched down beside Rosie, holding 3 picture books and looking at a 4th with an expression of genuine consideration. She was a dark green coat and her hair was damp at the edges, as though she'd come in out of rain. There was a canvas bag at her feet already half full of returned items. "Edwin Marsh," Rosie said, spotting him immediately, and with evident satisfaction, as though he had arrived on schedule. Frances looked up. Something crossed her face. Pleasure, he thought, though he was not in the habit of trusting his own readings of such things. "This is becoming a pattern," she said. "The Annex is a small neighborhood," he said, which was true, and also he suspected not the whole truth about either of them. They left at the same time, carrying separate bags, walking in the same direction because they lived near each other, it turned out. Frances and Rosie in a narrow Victorian semi on Palmerston that her late husband had bought in 1991 and that she had no intention of ever leaving. This came out over the course of Ford with Frances, because her mother was working in Whitehorse for a year and a half, that Frances had taught secondary school English for 32 years and retired 8 months ago and was still not sure what to do with her mornings, and that Rosie had very strong opinions about libraries and horses and was ambivalent about the rest. "And you?" Frances said at the corner of Palmerston. "Lawyer," Edwin said. "Bay Street. Very boring." "I doubt that," Frances said. "Some of it is," he said. "The parts that aren't are difficult in ways that are hard to explain at a corner." She smiled at that. "Fair enough." Rosie had already walked 3 steps down the block and turned around impatient. "Gran," she said. "I'm cold." Frances pulled her scarf tighter. "That's what you get for refusing a hat." "Hats ruin everything," Rosie said with complete conviction. Edwin said goodbye on the corner. He watched them go. The small girl and her grandmother, the library bags swinging, and stood there for a moment after they disappeared through the gate, the cold settling around him in the particular way of March, which was winter pretending to be almost over. He went home and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking at nothing in particular. He was 61 years old. He had won 11 of 14 appeals. He had a wall in his office that he'd painted himself and never fixed. He had always said, fine. He thought about fine for a while, and then he called his friend Barry and asked him something he hadn't asked anyone in a very long time. "If you were going to ask someone for coffee," Edwin said carefully, "someone you'd run into at a post office and a library and a cafe, someone with a grandchild who is approximately 9 years old and believes horses should have careers, how would you do it?" Barry was quiet for a moment. "Edwin," he said, "are you asking me how to ask a woman out?" "I'm asking hypothetically. You haven't asked anyone out since Carol. I'm aware of that. That was 6 years ago." "Barry, you should just ask her," Barry said, directly. "Don't make it complicated." "I always make things complicated," Edwin said. "It's why I'm good at my job." "That's why you're good at your job," Barry said. "It has nothing to do with this. Just ask her." Edwin thanked him and hung up and stood there in his kitchen with the coffee going cold on the counter. Outside, the maple tree in his backyard was beginning to show the very first suggestions of buds, tiny and tight, the color of something about to happen. He decided to go back to the post office on Tuesday. He did not have anything to mail. He was going to have to think of something to mail. He found her on the front walk of her house, actually, before he made it to the post office, because Rosie was chasing a squirrel across the lawn and had left the gate open, and Frances was coming down the steps saying, "Rosie, leave the squirrel alone, Rosie. The squirrel does not want to be your friend." Rosie and Edwin walked by at exactly that moment and stopped. Frances straightened up and saw him, and for a second neither of them said anything. The squirrel escaped up the maple tree. Rosie considered this outcome, then apparently accepted it and turned around. "Edwin Marsh," she said. "Hello, Rosie." "We're going to get bread," Rosie said, "and Gran needs the pharmacy." "Rosie," Frances said in a tone Edwin was beginning to recognize as the one reserved for unnecessary disclosures. "That's fine," Rosie said, with the serenity of someone who has never once been embarrassed. "He already knows where we live." Frances looked at Edwin. Edwin looked at Frances. "Would you like to walk with us?" Frances said. "Since you're apparently in the neighborhood." "I'm in the neighborhood," Edwin confirmed. "Are you going to the post office again?" "I was thinking about it." She held the gate open. "I'll walk you that far then." "Rosie." "Coat." Rosie put on her coat, which she had been carrying rather than wearing, and the three of them went down Palmerston toward Bloor, Rosie between them for the first half block, and then running ahead to look at something in a puddle. Then back, then ahead again, operating at a different frequency than the two adults who followed her at a pace that had no particular urgency about it. Edwin told Frances about the appeal he had just finished. Not the details, but the shape of it, the thing that made it hard. She listened without interrupting, which was rarer than people thought. She told him about a student she'd had 20 years ago who had sent her a letter recently, out of nowhere, to say that a poem they'd read in class was the reason he'd become a teacher himself. She said she hadn't known what to do with the letter. She'd read it 4 times. "That's the right number of times," Edwin said. She looked at him sideways. "Is it? Some things need 4 readings," he said. "Some need more. That one sounds like it needed exactly 4. They were at the pharmacy by then." Rosie held the door. "You can wait here," Rosie told Edwin gravely. "It won't be long. Gran only needs one thing." "I can come in," Edwin said. "You can," Rosie agreed. "But there's a good bench out here. It gets the sun." She was right. It did get the sun. He sat on the bench and tipped his face up toward the March light, which was thin and precise and felt like the beginning of a permission he hadn't known he was waiting for. When Frances came out, she sat down beside him. Not close, but not far. Rosie had spotted something in the window of the shop next door and was pressing her nose to the glass. "She likes you," Frances said. "She's good at making people feel that way," Edwin said. "The horse drawing made me feel it, too." Frances smiled. "She gave you the horse drawing? She showed it to me." "There's a distinction." "There is," Frances agreed. "She doesn't show everyone." A bus went by on Bloor. A man walked past with a retriever who stopped to investigate the bench and was persuaded onward. The sun moved half an inch across the concrete. "I'd like to have dinner with you sometime," Edwin said. "If you'd want that." He said it the way he'd said things in court for 30 years, clearly and without excessive preamble, because he had learned that clarity was not the same as coldness, and that most people, when they heard something honest, recognized it. Frances was quiet for a moment. "Without Rosie," she said. "That would be up to you," Edwin said. "But yes, I was thinking without Rosie. Rosie will want a full report," Frances said. "I'll prepare something." She laughed, that same unself-conscious laugh from the cafe, the one that had surprised him the first time. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Rosie came back from the window. She looked at both of them with the assessment of a child who misses nothing. And apparently whatever she found was acceptable, because she said only, "Bakery is at the next block," and set off down the street as though this were her itinerary. And they were very welcome to follow it. They followed it. Dinner was at a small Italian place on College that Edwin had eaten at twice before but never paid enough attention to. He paid attention this time. The table was small enough that the candle threw light across both of them without theatrics, and the wine was good, and Frances told him about her husband, Patrick, who had died of a cardiac event at 63, quick and entirely without warning, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, and Edwin told her about Carol, which was different, because Carol was alive and living in Kelowna with someone named Douglas, and the grief of it was a different shape than loss, but it was still a shape you carried. They talked about what it felt like to be the one left in a house that had been built for two, and agreed that it felt strange in ways that were specific to Tuesday nights and Sunday mornings, and the particular silence of a kitchen when you are cooking for one. "I make pasta standing up," Edwin said, "at the counter." "I read in Patrick's chair," Frances said. "It took me 2 years before I could. Now I can't imagine reading anywhere else." "That seems right," Edwin said. "It does," she said. They talked about Rosie, who Frances worried about in the precise and experienced way of someone who loves a child and knows how easily children absorb the unspoken difficulties of the adults around them. They talked about Frances's daughter, Clara, working up north and managing better than anyone had expected, and Edwin's sons in Vancouver who called regularly and visited too infrequently, and who he was proud of in the speechless way that never quite found words. He walked her home. It was cold enough for breath to show, and the streetlights on Palmerston threw amber circles on the wet pavement, and they walked slowly because neither of them was in a hurry. At her gate, she turned. "This was good," she said. "It was," Edwin agreed. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I want to be honest about that." "So do I," he said. "Not know what it is, I mean. I'm all right with that." She looked at him for a moment. The light from the front porch reached the side of her face. "Rosie is going to ask me exactly 3 questions," she said, "in order. She's very methodical. What are the 3 questions? Where did you go? What did you eat? And whether you like him?" Edwin was quiet for a second. "What will you tell her?" Frances considered this seriously, the way Rosie considered things. College Street, pasta, and yes. She went inside. The porch light stayed on for a while after the door closed, and Edwin stood at the gate long enough to notice it, the way you notice things. When you are paying attention, when the evening has been the kind of evening that teaches you to pay attention again. He didn't tell anyone at the office. This was partly habit and partly something more protective. A sense that the thing was new enough to need quiet around it, the way seeds need dark before they can find their way up. He had lunch with Barry on Thursday and said only that he had gone to dinner and it had gone well. And Barry, who knew him well enough to leave things alone when they were going well, nodded and talked about his knee for 20 minutes. Spring came to the annex the way it always did, incrementally, and then all at once. The forsythia on his block first, then the magnolias on the side streets, then the sudden grass green that appeared in one weekend and made everyone who had forgotten the city could look like this remember it. Edwin began to notice the neighborhood differently, not just as the route between his house and the subway, but as a place that had textures. The cafe on Brunswick where the chairs were always crooked, the bookshop on Harvard where the owner never looked up but always knew where everything was, the specific intersection where the wind came off the park and hit you sideways no matter which way you were going. He walked more. He had always run for exercise, methodically, 4 mornings a week, but walking was different, and he found himself doing it the way Frances seemed to do it, without destination, or with the destination being secondary to the going. He met Rosie on a Saturday in April, coming out of the bookshop, and she was carrying a book about horses that was thicker than her forearm. "That looks heavy," he said. "It's not," she said. "I've been practicing." He carried it anyway at her direction until they reached the corner where Frances was waiting, and then he handed it back, and Rosie accepted it without ceremony and walked ahead toward home, and Frances said, "You didn't have to." "I know," Edwin said. She looked at him. "She's been practicing," he said. Frances smiled. "She has. It's a whole program she's developed. I believe it, he said. They stood for a moment on the corner, the April sun doing its preliminary work on the street around them, the maple trees just beginning to remember what they were. Next Friday? Frances said. Yes, Edwin said. She walked after Rosie. Edwin went back to the bookshop because he'd come for a book and not bought one yet, and the owner pointed him, without looking up, toward the section he hadn't known he was looking for. He found what he needed, and went home through the long way, past the park, and through the back streets, the city warm and particular around him, a city he had lived in for 30 years, and was somehow, now, beginning to see more clearly than he had before. He did not know what it was, this thing that was starting. He had said so honestly, and meant it, and found, walking home through the April afternoon with a book under his arm, and the specific pleasure of having nowhere to be until he chose to be there, that not knowing was all right. Some things didn't need to be named to be real. Some things arrived so quietly that you didn't notice until you were already in the middle of them. The way spring arrived, the way the light changed, the way a girl with a tilting box and a purple jacket had stopped him on a wet February sidewalk and changed, without fanfare, the entire direction of his afternoon. And then, as it turned out, the direction of quite a few afternoons after that.